I was passing by my son-in-law's house and decided to make a quick stop to see how he was doing. As I approached, I saw my wife's car parked next to the gate, a shiny silver Cadillac that should have been in our garage. My heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. I quietly approached the window, careful not to make any noise. What I heard inside froze me in my tracks. "As soon as that old man signs the papers, we'll have everything we plan," said a female voice. It was Shanice. Her tone entered through the window like poison into my veins. I stood paralyzed in the car right in front of my daughter Keisha's house. The keys were still in the ignition. 5 minutes earlier, I had called her to surprise her. I wanted to invite her to dinner. "Dad, I'm not home," she said cheerfully. But Darnell is there working on some papers. And there was Shanice's Cadillac, parked in the driveway as if nothing had happened. I turned off the engine and with trembling legs approached the window. Through a slit in the curtain, I could see everything clearly. My wife, with whom I had shared 25 years of marriage, was comfortably reclining on the sofa as if she were the lady of the house, and my son-in-law, with that arrogant smile that always annoyed me, was leaning against the bookshelf. "Everything is going according to schedule," he said. "In June, we filed the lawsuit, alleging irreconcilable differences. According to the new laws in the state of Georgia, Shanice would receive half of all the assets accumulated during the marriage, plus lifetime alimony." She let out a sharp laugh, the same tone that I found charming years ago. "The construction company alone is worth about $12 million, she added, "plus the house, the land, the investments. It's almost $20 million in total." My hands were shaking. I took out my cell phone and started recording, just as Darnell was continuing his law class. "The best thing is that he trusts us blindly. He has no idea that we already have everything calculated. Bank statements, deeds, business appraisals, everything copied. He himself gave us the keys to his empire." 2 years of pretending to be a devoted wife," said Shanice, looking at her nails, listening to his boring stories about construction, pretending to care about his employees' payroll. "My God," she sighed. "That man still thinks I love him." A crack under my foot, a branch inside the house. They both fell silent and turned toward the window like deer hearing a gunshot. I pressed myself against the brick wall, my heart pounding, my palms sweaty, even though it was cold outside. "Did you hear that?" Shanice asked, alarmed. "It was probably the neighbor's cat," Darnell replied. "You worry about everything. If I were you, I'd worry too. What if Marcus knows everything? He doesn't know." He laughed. "Even if we tell him to his face, he won't understand. By September, you'll be divorced, with money, and doing whatever you want, with whoever you want," he added. I forced myself not to move. The cell phone was still recording. Every word was recorded. 15 minutes later, I returned to the car, but everything was different now. 25 years of marriage reduced to a cold and ruthless legal plan between my wife and my son-in-law. That yellow folder on the table haunted me mentally. Months of data collection, of hidden strategies, while I worked 16 hours a day to keep everything going. I sat behind the wheel, looking at the hands that had built this business from scratch, that had carried Shanice to the altar when her father refused to attend the wedding, and her words echoed in my head. He really believes he loves me. And yes, he did. Until today, when the door of the house opened just as I was reaching for the keys to start the car. Shanice came out first, her bag slung over her shoulder with a carefree air, as if it were any other day. Behind her appeared Darnell, adjusting his tie with the haughty attitude of a self-assured lawyer. They weren't expecting to see me. The surprise on Shanice's face was like a slap in the face. Her voice tightened when she saw me. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" I made an effort to remain calm, even though inside everything was falling apart. I stopped by to check on a construction site nearby. I lied calmly as I got out of the car. I decided to stop by and say hello to Keisha. Darnell immediately stepped toward Shanice, instinctively placing himself in front of her, as if he were her legal guardian. He stared at me, scrutinizing my face for cracks in my story. Shanice quickly said that Keisha wasn't there. We were helping Darnell with some documents for a client. She said it with a naturalness that hurt, as if she had been rehearsing it for years. How many lies like that would I have swallowed without hesitation? I nodded neutrally. I reminded Shanice that she had told me that morning that she had to stay late for a presentation. A moment of panic crossed her face. My head hurt, so I left early. She stammered. What a shame, I replied. Well, Darnell must have a lot of work. Complicated subject, isn't it? Division of property. He responded automatically, as if his brain were on autopilot, but immediately corrected himself. A client's. If everything around me weren't falling apart, I would have laughed at the patheticness of the scene. Shanice asked me if I'd been there long. I just got here, I replied, looking at both of them with a forced smile. Why? She smiled tensely. You look tense. It was ironic. The woman who had been planning my financial ruin for months was asking if I was feeling okay. I had to stifle a laugh. I'm fine, just had a long day. You know how it is. I gestured to Darnell as if apologizing for interrupting. I won't take up any more of your time. He replied that they were almost done and put his hand on Shanice's lower back with a familiarity that turned my stomach. How long had this been going on? Since when were there 3 of us in this marriage? I turned toward the car, took out my cell phone and looked at it as if checking a message. I noticed that Darnell didn't take his eyes off the phone. Well, I'm leaving. Dinner won't make itself. Shanice replied. I'm almost done here, don't worry. As I got into the car, I pretended to remember something. Oh, right, Shanice, the clinic called. They wanted to reschedule your checkup, something about the time not fitting in with your work. Her face reflected a second of utter bewilderment, as if her soul had frozen. It must have been a mistake, she murmured. I'll call them. Sure, it happens sometimes. I started the car and drove out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw them stand apart, motionless. Then they quickly approached each other and began to whisper. That triangle of betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was a reality. They knew, or at least sensed, that I had seen something. But what they didn't know was that I had 43 minutes of recording on my phone, clear, crisp audio, legal, and that changed everything. I merged into traffic, my hands no longer shaking on the steering wheel, the shock beginning to fade and a lucid coldness taking its place. They thought they were playing chess with a blind man. Soon they would realize how wrong they were. The 15-minute drive home was a blur. Traffic lights, roundabouts, cars, everything mechanical. The car turned by itself at the roundabout that led to our residential street, passing in front of the gardens tended by a gardener I never hired because Shanice said she didn't have time. I passed the fountain she had installed for our anniversary, and there it was, the house I built with my own hands in 1995. Every beam, every brick, every blueprint was a declaration of love for a woman who now wanted to take everything away from me. I got out and felt the silence, not a peaceful one, but a painful emptiness. Shanice used to fill that home with her comments about the neighbors, her complaints about the coffee at the bar not being to her liking, her comments about prices at the market, and I wondered how many of those things were genuine and how many were part of a charade. Our wedding photo still hung above the fireplace. December 15th, 1987. Shanice in an ivory dress that sparkled under the dim light of the event hall, a radiant, youthful smile. Me in a rented suit, standing next to her, looking confused, but really happy. She was 22 then. She worked as a secretary in one of our clients' offices on a commercial street in the city. I was 37, and my construction company was just beginning to stabilize after 10 years of instant success and tireless work. We met at a New Year's toast while I was renovating her office. She laughed at my bad jokes about cement and bricks, and I, not quite sure if her interest was real, went for it anyway. I invited her to dinner, and she accepted so quickly that I thought she had been waiting for me. That first dinner at an Italian restaurant ended at midnight with us talking about dreams, about my desire to not only build buildings but homes where people could feel at peace. She looked at me with those big eyes and said, "You don't build houses, you create shelters for families." 6 months later, I proposed. On the kitchen table, among bills and papers, was a card that read, "My last anniversary, 25 years." The same neat, orderly blue handwriting that I would recognize anywhere. "Dear husband, thank you for fulfilling all my dreams. Here's to another 25 years of happiness. With love, Shanice." That word, love, now sounded hollow, like a mockery. I walked into the living room and stopped in front of the shelves full of photos of our daughter Keisha as a child. I had taken many of those photos myself during Shanice's pregnancy. On June 8th, 1995, our daughter was born. Tiny, wrinkled, crying loudly, but for us, a miracle. Shanice held her in her arms and seemed born to be a mother. Those early years were the best. Shanice gave herself completely. School meetings, extracurricular activities, birthdays with clowns and personalized cakes. She documented everything with her camera. She didn't miss a moment. "You're the best dad in the world," she told me the day Keisha received her high school diploma. She cried as she watched our daughter climb up to receive her certificate. "Everything I achieve will be thanks to you," she said. "Not to us, to me." Even then, the cracks had begun to show. I sank into the armchair, the one Shanice always hated because it was ugly and, according to her, ruined the living room's atmosphere. It all came over me like a wave. The anniversary cruise through Patagonia, where she was thrilled to see whales and glaciers. Keisha's college graduation, where we both cried. Christmases full of lights, decorations, and happy chaos. And then the change, when "thank you for taking care of us" turned into "we deserve more." Suddenly, gifts became obligations and gratitude became a demand. The audio recording came back to my mind. 25 years pretending to be a devoted wife, her voice said. Shanice hadn't loved me for a long time. Maybe she never did. Every gesture of affection, every anniversary celebrated, every "I love you" in the dim light was strategy, not emotion, calculation, so that I would work, earn more, build her palace. That hadn't been love, it had been an investment, and now she wanted it all. It wasn't anger that dominated me, it was a meticulous, surgical coldness. Shanice thought she was playing the long game, that she had designed a foolproof plan to take everything and leave without a sound, but she didn't know who she was married to. She didn't know that I was the one who built Foster Construction from scratch with an old vehicle and a toolbox, that for decades I signed contracts with municipalities, managed teams, negotiated at tables with people much tougher than her. It was time to think clearly, to understand when it all started to go wrong, and the answer was immediate. 2020, the year we won the bid to build the new district center, $50 million over 3 years, the largest contract in the company's history. That night I came home thinking we would toast with champagne, that there would be hugs and pride, but Shanice was sitting in front of a real estate magazine with a calculator in her hand. "We can buy the house on Jefferson Street now," she said without looking at me. "The one with the round driveway, the pool. The Harrisons are asking for $4.2 million, not a word about my achievement, not a well done. Just one question, what did she stand to gain from this? I told her we hadn't even signed the contract yet, that we still needed plans, permits, staff, but she replied without hesitation. "The city is obligated to pay, the money is guaranteed." We argued for hours. She had everything written down to the last penny. House, club membership, travel, cars, everything in the first person, not me, us. At that moment, I should have noticed the difference, but I was too busy crunching numbers to pay attention to the language. In 2021, her demands became more constant. It was no longer a house in the country or a special trip. Now the private club became indispensable, especially when the Parkers were admitted. Our country house by the river became a source of ridicule, an embarrassment compared to the houses where the Johnsons spent their summers. Shanice began to make veiled, poisonous remarks. "Other husbands know how to make a woman happy," she blurted out one night while cutting the salmon. When the intimacy disappeared, I hardly noticed. I thought it was age, stress, normal things after so many years. Then came the separate bedroom, supposedly because of my snoring. We had been sleeping together for more than 2 decades without complaint, but suddenly she couldn't stand it anymore. Conversations at dinner turned into monologues about shopping, neighbors, the car that a friend received for no reason, because her husband values her, because she sacrificed her career for marriage. That phrase stuck with me like a hammer. Sacrifice. She who lived in a house built with my sweat in a home sustained by my constant work. Darnell's behavior began to seem strange to me after Keisha's marriage. It was in September 2023 when Shanice started asking unusual questions about divorce rights. "Imagine that a friend wants to separate and her husband is hiding assets," she would say with feigned innocence. Then came the calls she took from other rooms, supposedly from her book club or charity meeting. How many calls were really about books? I listened to it all again. The recording, Shanice's laughter as she said she had been acting as a wife for 25 years, the constant questions about my company, her insistence on having joint accounts, even though she managed separate cards and made secret transfers. While I was building our future, she was busy measuring how much of it she could take from me without leaving a trace, but she made a mistake. She forgot who she was living with. I got up from the couch and went straight to the study, the heart of my work, where 35 years of contracts, reports, balance sheets, permits, everything she thought she had scanned without me noticing were filed away. But what was truly valuable wasn't there. I took out my cell phone and searched through my contacts for the name I knew would give me back control. Malik Carter, my accountant, my friend, and the only one who knew the legal structures I had created years ago. Perfectly legal, but impossible for someone like Shanice to detect. It was time to make that call that would change everything. 3 days of methodical work turned my study into a veritable operations center. 2 laptops were open on the oak desk I had built with my own hands more than a decade ago. On the screens, bank accounts, legal bases, property documents. The pages of my yellow notebooks covered the surface with columns of assets, timelines, weak points, pressure tools. I shaved carefully. I put on the navy blue suit that Shanice always said made me look respectable, and the reading glasses that she said gave me an air of seriousness. It's funny how the shock of betrayal can turn into calculated coldness when you've been running a business and dealing with bureaucrats for 35 years. Malik was more useful than I imagined. Those tax structures we devised together to optimize taxes were now an invisible fortress for Shanice. She thought she was poking around the facade when in reality, the gold was still stored underground, but she didn't waste any time either. I checked her bank transactions and there it was, more than $47,000 transferred in 8 months to a joint savings account, whose holder was, of course, Darnell T. In other words, he was not only her lover and legal accomplice, but also her financial partner. Lunches at the Oakwood Club for outrageous amounts, spa sessions, luxury purchases that coincided with her book club meetings. Every expense was a clue, a sign of someone preparing for a new life. Like that designer handbag that cost more than 120,000 pesos, bought on the same day that, in the morning, she complained that the salmon at the supermarket was too expensive. Darnell, for his part, was in no better shape. My acquaintances in the construction world told me he was up to his neck in debt. He owed more than $180,000 in student loans, and the rent for his office, which was just for show, cost more than $280,000 a month. He sold himself as a successful lawyer, but his suppliers already had him on file. That guy lives as if he has IPF behind him, an old colleague told me. It turns out he owed more than $2 million to contractors. They all received promises, but never any payments. Even the Bar Association had 2 ethics complaints against him related to financial irregularities. Although they were dismissed, the mere fact of having them on his record was a stain, and in the legal world, a stain like that is not easily erased. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the evidence map. Shanice and Darnell had underestimated me. They thought they saw a busy, distracted man, too tired to notice what was going on. But they forgot that I was the one who built Foster Construction from the ground up, that I started with an old car and a toolbox, and that I knew how to protect myself. Then the phone rang. The name that appeared on the screen made my body tense up. Keisha. Hi, sweetie. How's everything going? Her voice sounded careful, almost therapeutic. Dad, are you okay? I wanted to ask you something. Is everything okay between you and Mom? I clutched the phone. How much did she know? What had she noticed? I pretended not to understand. Why do you ask? She hesitated. I don't know. Mom's been really upset about money, even though your company's doing well, right? And Darnell started asking me weird questions. How is your business structured? Who controls what? It gave me a bad feeling. My daughter, a psychologist, had already sensed the danger. I told her that maybe it was just curiosity, that maybe her mother was worried about her stability. Maybe, she murmured. But if something serious happens, will you tell me? That question pierced me. To tell her that her mother and her husband were conspiring to destroy me, that she was living a lie. Of course, sweetie, I promise. We hung up. I stared at the phone. If Darnell was using my daughter as a source, then the plot was deeper than I had imagined. It was time to give them exactly the information they wanted, but on my terms. That same day, I received a call on the secure line I had with my trusted accountant, Evelyn Barnes, with whom I had been working for over a decade. Her voice, precise as always, sounded firm. Marcus, we have the documents for asset protection ready. When you mentioned that you wanted to restructure everything, I reviewed the options again. I found a very solid solution. She paused. The silence hung like a tacit confirmation that she understood what was left unsaid. Am I right in thinking that this is not about inheritance? Yes, Evelyn, I replied calmly. It's more complicated than that. I understand. Threats that come from within the home are the most delicate. I have already helped other clients with similar situations. I know exactly what to do. Everything will be registered before noon. From now on, no one will be able to touch a penny without leaving a legal trail. At 10 o'clock sharp, I was sitting in the bank's meeting room across from Terrence Brown, the regional manager and my old golf tournament partner. The atmosphere was impeccable, with freshly brewed coffee, polished furniture, and a business-like atmosphere. I handed him a thick folder and said, I need a preventive freeze on all access to joint accounts, including cards and family lines of credit. Everything must be frozen until the identity of the account holders is verified. He raised an eyebrow, the whole thing, without exception. May I ask why? I just smiled discreetly. No need. I signed the papers, and in less than an hour, everyone involved would receive notifications. No one could move a penny without appearing in person at the branch with verified documentation and signature. At 11:47, the security system blocked all access. At 12:03, a transaction was rejected. At that very moment, I was reviewing the budget for a project on the outskirts of Savannah. At 12:50 p.m., the first call came in. It was Shanice. Marcus, do you know what's going on with our accounts? I tried to pay at the club and my card was declined. I called the bank and they told me everything is blocked. Do you know anything? Not a word about the account with Darnell. No mention of the $47,000 he transferred. Not a hint of confession. Just feigned surprise. Blocked. How strange. What did they tell you? That you have to verify your identity and show up in person. It's embarrassing. I was with Gabrielle, the mayor's wife, and I couldn't pay for lunch. You want to kill me with shame, Marcus? Her concern was not the foiled plot, but the social embarrassment. I knew her too well. I'm going to call Terrence, I said. It must have been a misunderstanding. I didn't call. I went to the construction site to breathe in the cement, talk to the workers, look at the blueprints, and be with the people who respected me for what I did. The phone didn't stop ringing all afternoon. At 1:47 p.m., another message from Shanice. I still can't access online banking. It's a joke. At 2:23 p.m., Terrence Brown's secretary says he's busy all day. Can you talk? At 3:15 p.m., even the additional card is blocked. You left me penniless. What's going on? Each message gave me a kind of grim relief. For 25 years, I offered her absolute financial security, and now, for the first time, she felt what it was like to be without economic power, not out of revenge, but out of justice. But what was most revealing was what happened next. At 4:30 p.m., Malcolm Rivers, the private investigator I worked with on corporate matters, called me. His tone was direct. We had movement from Darnell. He tried 3 times to access the joint account with your wife. When that failed, he tried to withdraw money from another fund. Which one, I asked. Your granddaughter's education fund. He is listed as the administrator, but it is also blocked, as you requested. And his reaction was furious. He threatened to sue. He yelled at the bank. He is beside himself. It was the classic profile of an arrogant lawyer who had just lost his only ace up his sleeve. At 6 p.m., I was back home checking everything on my computer, every frozen account, every inactive card, automatic payments now under my control. Shanice was limited to what she had in cash, legally impeccable, a husband protecting shared assets in the face of a possible marital conflict. The bank would back him up, but what they understood that day was even more important. The man they wanted to corner was no longer on the defensive. Now he was playing on the same level and with better cards. At 6:47 p.m., the phone rang again, Shanice again. For the first time, her voice was not one of annoyance or reproach, but of desperation. She knew that moment would come, the point where the victim's disguise falls away and the real urgency emerges. It was time to see how the accomplices begin to fall apart when the plan fails. On Saturday night, Shanice appeared at Darnell's office as if she were being chased by the devil himself. The building guard didn't even flinch, accustomed to seeing agitated faces in expensive suits, but her heels echoed against the marble as if each step heralded disaster. From a cafe across from the entrance, Malcolm watched everything. He had people inside connected by the old ventilation ducts that still linked some of the offices. It was all part of the plan. Shanice had made a phone call right on the sidewalk in front of our house, unaware that even the neighbor could hear her. "Darnell, we need to talk urgently." Everything went wrong. On the 14th floor, the light in Taylor's office was still on. Through the window, two silhouettes could be seen moving around, gesturing with papers scattered across the desk. Their bodies spoke for them. Tension, nerves, chaos. Fragments of conversations came through the ducts. Shanice was trembling. "Marcus knows. He blocked everything. I couldn't even get gas." Darnell's response was curt. "It's no coincidence. He showed up at Keisha's house just as we were discussing the final steps. He must have heard something." "How much?" she asked, as if she feared the information more than the man. "Enough. Otherwise he wouldn't have frozen everything." There was a pause. "We have to assume the worst. He may have recorded everything." The silence that followed was like a gunshot in the night. They realized at the same time that naive Marcus was perhaps several steps ahead of them. "What now?" she asked. "Speed things up. No more half measures. On Monday, I'll file for divorce with urgent precautionary measures." The strategy was clear: total victimization. We'll allege financial violence that restricts your access to money and isolates you. Shanice was immediately interested. "It sounds credible." "It is. We'll portray him as a controlling type who uses money to manipulate you. The freezing of accounts will be the proof." The rustling of papers mingled with the arrogance in her voice. "We need to compile a list of psychological pressures. Every time he didn't consult you about spending, when he criticized you for your purchases, when he restricted your credit cards." Shanice hesitated, but he was never controlling. He always gave me everything. "So we'll frame it as emotional dependency, using his generosity to make you feel like you couldn't live without him." The cynicism was repugnant. 25 years of effort turned into a plan to portray me as an abuser. "And Keisha?" Shanice asked uncertainly. "She's not going to believe me right away." "And that's good for us," Darnell replied. "Her distant reaction will serve as proof that Marcus manipulated her. We'll say that he convinced her of your supposed instability. Do you want my daughter to turn against her father? I want to save your financial future." And if she, as a psychologist, doubts you, then her testimony serves as technical proof of a toxic family. They were willing to use my daughter as a weapon, to misrepresent her sensibility as coldness, and they planned everything down to the last detail. How to answer questions, what messaging to use, where to meet. It was a Cold War, disguised as a noble cause, but they didn't know that while they were placing their pieces on the board, I was already moving mine with greater precision. The next morning, Shanice met with Keisha for their traditional monthly coffee, a routine that was once endearing. They sat at their usual table, but this time Shanice wasn't looking to share, she was looking to manipulate. "Keisha, I'm worried about your dad. He's acting strange. I think he's mentally unwell." My daughter, with the clinical instinct of someone who studied for years to read gestures and silences, set down her coffee cup with cold calm. "What makes you think that? He controls everything. He cuts me off financially. He says it's for security, but I feel like it's punishment. How long has this been going on? Months, maybe more. But just yesterday, he blocked everything." Keisha frowned. "Mom, financial control can be violence, but it can also be a way to protect assets when there are legal threats." Marcus said something. Shanice hesitated. She wasn't expecting intelligent questions. She was expecting compassion. "He says it's for banking security, but after 25 years, I know it's punishment. Maybe he found out I want a divorce." "Wait, you want a divorce? Isn't he holding you back?" The analysis hit her like a ton of bricks. Her daughter was dismantling her without raising her voice. "I'm just telling you that he's acting strange," she defended herself. "And as a psychologist, you should notice that." "As a psychologist, I'm telling you that drastic changes have a cause. What happened 3 days ago?" Shanice was speechless. Keisha was studying her, no longer as a mother, but as a clinical case. "Mom, aren't you asking for help? Are you asking me to take your side? Is that it?" Shanice didn't answer. She knew the story wasn't convincing and that her daughter, as an expert, wasn't going to endorse such an obvious lie. She finished her coffee in frustration and left without another word. She couldn't play the victim if she had no one to applaud her. Meanwhile, I received a call that would change the course of everything. My old partner, Victor Monroe, told me that the Bar Association had opened a formal investigation against Taylor. He lost everything, he told me. There are complaints from contractors who say he charged them and didn't pay them. He used money from trust funds to cover his debts. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was exactly the amount I had seen disappear from his accounts. Are they going to testify? Gladly. They're furious. They're bankrupt because of him. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone. I spoke to an electrician from Mobile, a plumber from Birmingham, a roofer from Montgomery. They all had similar stories. They did the work, gave him estimates, and he vanished with the money. With all that, I put together the dossier, and at 2:30 p.m., I called the Bar Association. I want to report a lawyer for professional misconduct. I have evidence, names, dates, amounts. 3 witnesses are willing to testify. At 4 p.m., they sent the summons, and at 4:47 p.m., I received a message from Malcolm Rivers. Darnell left his office with 3 boxes and drove away. We followed him. No need, I replied. I know exactly where he's going. Just as I imagined, Darnell went straight to Shanice's house. When the castle crumbles, the conspirators huddle together like rats trying to float on the same raft. Let them get together. Let them hug each other. Let them try to piece together what's left. I continued to gather data, evidence, movements. That night I sat in my office, the lamp casting a warm light on the table, and began to line everything up. Calls, transfers, meetings, key dates. It was like a strategy board where the pieces finally fell into place. I had it all. All that remained was to decide when and how to deliver the final blow. Then the notification sounded. An email from Evelyn Barnes. Subject, response draft. Strategy number 2. I opened the file. It was a legal defense strategy crafted with surgical precision, covering everything from the division of assets to scenarios in the event of a legal escalation. On the last page, a detailed summary. In the event that the other party uses accusations of emotional violence or financial abuse, we recommend filing a counterclaim based on evidence of psychological pressure, attempted illegitimate appropriation of assets, and manipulation of offspring for financial gain. It wasn't just a defense, it was a sword, it was a shield, it was justice. Minutes later, a message from Keisha. Dad, Mom is screaming like crazy. She says you declared war. What's going on? I took a moment before responding. I couldn't tell her everything calmly, daughter. We're just working out some adult issues. Everything will be fine. She didn't insist. But I knew she sensed that the family structure she knew was collapsing before her eyes. Monday, 9:14 a.m., the phone rang. Mr. Marcus Foster, we are calling from the family court to notify you that your wife has filed for divorce with precautionary measures for reasons of economic and emotional security. You must appear at a preliminary hearing this Wednesday. I wasn't surprised. Darnell moved quickly. I was afraid she would expose me sooner. 10 minutes later, my company's administrative office called me. Marcus, Shanice called us. She is demanding that we transfer $70,000 to her card. She says it is your obligation. What should we do? I replied without hesitation. Not a single dollar will be moved without my written order. Understood. I closed the window in my office and took a deep breath. The sun was shining. It was just another Monday, but the official war had just begun. Wednesday, 10:27 a.m., courtroom number 4. A few journalists sat in the back, 2 lawyers sat down, and Shanice stood with the solemn air of a martyred saint, her arms crossed, her eyes reddened. Next to her was Darnell with his folder, dressed in the suit he wore when he wanted to look successful. I entered, greeted the judge with a slight gesture, and sat down next to Evelyn, who handed me a folder with the hearing protocol. The accusations were already there: moral pressure, financial isolation, threats to psychological well-being. The judge opened the session and asked Shanice to present her case. Her voice trembled with perfectly calibrated, restrained tears. My husband cut off all my access to money. I have no way to buy food. He refuses to talk to me. He is cold and distant. I feel trapped. I stood up when the judge asked for my position. Your Honor, the funds mentioned are joint accounts. The freezing measure was taken through legal banking procedures due to suspicions of possible attempts at unauthorized asset stripping. I have evidence of these suspicions. I handed over a folder. On the first page, the transfer receipt for $47,000 from Shanice to Darnell's personal account. On the second, the receipt for the purchase of a luxury handbag. On the same day, he asked me for money for his mother's medication. On the third, the transcript of the recorded conversation where they both outlined how to portray me as an abuser in order to take everything away from me. The judge raised his eyebrows. This is your supporting evidence. Yes, Your Honor, and I have also filed a complaint with the Bar Association against the legal representative here present. He is under investigation for misuse of trust funds and other financial irregularities. Darnell shifted in his seat. The judge looked at him sternly. Do you confirm the existence of such a joint account with Mrs. Foster? That is not relevant to this hearing, Your Honor. The issue is Mr. Foster's conduct. If you manage funds linked to the parties in conflict, then it is directly relevant. Shanice began to feel uneasy. I didn't know that would have legal consequences. I just wanted to have some independence. Independence, the judge repeated. Then why did you transfer the money to your lawyer? She remained silent. Evelyn, without saying a word, passed another volume to the judge. We also have records of repeated transfers to the same recipient for more than $300,000 over 8 months, as well as recordings where they plan to portray Mr. Foster as violent in order to gain a financial advantage in the proceedings. The judge looked at Shanice with a serious expression. The request for precautionary measures is denied. The divorce trial is postponed for 1 month. Both parties must submit a detailed report of accounts, properties, movements, and communications for the last 12 months. He banged his gavel. The room fell silent. 2 days later, Malcolm Rivers called again. This time his tone was serious, almost warning. Marcus, we found a second property on Telfair Street downtown in the name of a front man, but the payments come from Taylor's personal account. I remained silent, processing. And who lives there? A woman registered as your granddaughter's nanny, the same one Keisha had already said she didn't trust. Everything indicates that this property was ready for a move, perhaps even with the intention of taking the girl away. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, the city continued with its indifferent routine, the traffic, the sounds, the normal lives. But inside me, something was tightening. It was no longer just financial or marital betrayal. They were trying to take my family away from me, to use my granddaughter as part of a new life plan built on my foundations. I picked up the phone. Malcolm, activate everything necessary. A lawyer specializing in family and guardianship law. I want to review every document related to the girl's custody, authorizations, permits. If there is a single line that points to a legal maneuver to take my granddaughter away from me, we will file a lawsuit immediately. There was no need to explain further. I knew we were entering a deeper stage of the conflict. It was no longer about defending an inheritance. It was about protecting what I love most. The next morning, I went to see Keisha. She opened the door in her robe, with dark circles under her eyes and a tense expression on her face. Hi, Dad. Come in. I'll tell you right now. Darnell didn't sleep here last night. I nodded. The house smelled of coffee and cereal. The little girl was already at kindergarten. We sat in the kitchen like old times, cups in hand, uncomfortable silence. How are you? I asked, confused. Everything seems to be falling apart. Mom won't answer me. Darnell acts like nothing's wrong, but I know him. He's pale, nervous. Dad, are you going to tell me what's going on? I looked her in the eyes and took a deep breath. Yes, sweetie. I'll tell you. I told her everything, without drama, without exaggeration, just the facts. The transfers, the recordings, the conspiracy to declare me an abuser and take everything. I told her about the other property, the nanny, the possibility that they wanted to start a new life using the girl as an excuse. I showed her documents, screenshots, a fragment of the audio. I showed her the photo of Shanice and Darnell leaving that apartment together with shopping bags, laughing like teenagers, playing at having a double life. Keisha didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me with wide eyes. It's true. All of this is real. I nodded. Everything is documented. She covered her face with her hands. I didn't want to rush her. The silence at that moment was more eloquent than any words. Finally, she spoke with a broken voice. They wanted to take my daughter away. Maybe they hadn't done it yet, but they were getting ready. And you, with your clarity, were an obstacle. That's why they needed to manipulate you. She looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. I'm going to file for divorce and go to family court. If they try to touch my daughter, I want every legal door closed to them. I didn't interrupt her. That was her decision. And seeing her so firm was like looking at a younger version of myself, strong, temperate, dignified. My daughter wasn't going to let anyone crush her. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. In the days that followed, everything moved forward like an avalanche. Taylor's lawyer received an official notification from the Bar Association, a disciplinary hearing for misappropriation of client funds. Two of the contractors were ready to testify. Evelyn smiled at me when she handed me the subpoena. If he is suspended, his credibility as a lawyer in this case will plummet. Everything he has touched legally will be questioned, and that includes any ruling involving his representation. That same day, I got a call from the bank. Marcus tried to move money from a closed Shanice account to a legal trust. It all failed, but it was recorded. Do you want us to refer it to the prosecutor's office? Not yet. Just make sure everything is well documented. Their every move was new evidence of their true intentions. Finally, I decided to sit down and talk to Shanice face to face, without lawyers, without drama, in a downtown cafe where we once celebrated her birthday. She arrived tense, bundled up, her eyes dark. What is all this, Marcus? Why are you doing this to me? Sit down, let's talk. She sat down, but didn't take off her coat. She was ready to flee at the slightest touch. You're destroying everything. You're making me look like a gold digger. You're leaving me with nothing. Why? I leaned forward. You and your lover tried to turn me into an abuser to drain me, and you still ask why. I didn't know everything was going to get out of control. Yes, you did. You made decisions. You transferred money. You lied. You used our daughter. I didn't need to raise my voice. Just say it clearly. I'm offering you a deal. You give up any claims. You leave me the company. The apartment I owned before we got married stays with me. You get fair compensation. You live peacefully without scandal. You shameless woman. And if not, then it's war. With audio recordings, with lawsuits, with searches. You won't come out unscathed, but you can still come out with your dignity intact. She stared at her cup, her fingers trembling. I thought you were soft, that it would be easier. You were wrong. After a long silence, she nodded. All right, she signed it. A week later, everything was on paper. Divorce by mutual agreement, no claims. The company was still mine, the apartment too, the funds protected, what I had taken back. Darnell disappeared from the map. The disciplinary process against him progressed. Meanwhile, I returned to my house. I sat in front of the fireplace, the same one in front of which we used to drink tea years ago after our daughter was born. And I thought, I didn't lose. I survived, not with blows or screams, but with a cool head. And in this world, that's worth more than any victory. A month passed. Shanice left town. She wrote me a single message. She said she needed to start over, that it had all been too much for her. I didn't reply. It was no longer my business. Darnell disappeared as soon as the disciplinary proceedings began at the Bar Association. One of the contractors took legal action. Another demanded compensation for damages. The Bar Association finally suspended him from practicing law. He appealed, of course, as any proud lawyer would, but it was too late. The stain was there, and in the legal profession, a reputation without trust is like a hammer without a handle, useless. Keisha moved in with me. While the divorce was going on, we shared the house like in the old days. I cooked breakfast. She took my granddaughter to kindergarten. At night, we watched movies, talked about the past, about how things could have been. But she didn't lament. She didn't break down. She was strong as a protective mother, as a grateful daughter. One night as we drank mate on the porch, she said to me, "Dad, did you know that when I was a girl, I thought you were boring?" I laughed. "And now?" She smiled sweetly. "Now I see how strong you are. How do you know how to resist without breaking anything, without shouting, without destroying, just putting everyone in their place? I'm proud of you." It wasn't just a compliment. It was forgiveness for all the moments we never said anything, for all the unspoken emotions between father and daughter. One day I went out to the backyard and found a box in front of the gate. It had no return address or previous stamp. Inside was an old frame photo, our wedding. There was also a note written in Shanice's unmistakable handwriting. "You were the best. I didn't know how to appreciate it at the time. I'm sorry. S." I closed the box and looked up at the clear sky. I didn't cry. I just felt a kind of dry heat, like a gust of wind passing through an empty house. Some apologies don't need words. Sometimes simply not responding is the most dignified way to close a cycle. 6 months later, I went to the country house, the one we built when Keisha was 7 years old. I repaired it with patience alone. New paint, reinforced roof, the shed revived. It was slow work, but it gave me peace. One day, Malcolm Rivers came to visit me with 2 bottles of soda in a bag. He sat down next to me on the wooden bench under the eaves. "How are you, Foster?" "Alive, calm. Too calm, just right." He looked at me with that mixture of respect and closeness that you only have for someone who went through hell and came out walking. You know, in my job, I've seen a lot of guys break down. They didn't break you. Not only did you hold on, you turned around, analyzed who was stabbing you in the back, and responded not with your fists, but with intelligence. That's how a man should be. I smiled silently. Sometimes silence is the most powerful response. In the fall, I traveled to Georgia for a few days just to clear my head, a getaway. I walked into a random bookstore, and while I was browsing a shelf, I heard a familiar voice, "Marcus." I turned around. It was Evelyn Barnes, my lawyer, without folders, without a formal tone, in a long coat with a coffee in her hand. "What a surprise," I said, totally unexpected. "How are you?" "Fine, free. And you?" "I thought you would forget me after that case, but you didn't. You were an unforgettable client. Why? Because you didn't seek revenge. You just wanted to defend what was yours. That's rare." We went to a nearby cafe. We talked about life, books, children. As we said goodbye, she said, "If you come back to the city, write to me. Not as a client, but as a person." And then I knew that the cycle was ending, that something new could begin. Today, as I write this, I am 56 years old. I live alone in the same house I built for a family that is no longer there. It is quieter now, not empty, just calm. I did not become bitter or distrustful, just clearer, more aware of who is by your side for love and who does it out of interest. Shanice never wrote back. I am not waiting for her. Keisha is still close by. My granddaughter can already read on her own. She's growing up strong. Meanwhile, I'm building a terrace with my own hands. And you know what? I'm happy.